Dan Larimer's back, baby. EOS creator, Block.one CTO. One time he left, he's gone, he peaced out. He is back with this community-led effort to breathe some life into the EOS blockchain project. And also, EOS might get a rebrand. There's talk here that EOS and some of the assets that are associated with Block.one, which famously raised $4 billion in an ICO to build the software that powered the EOS blockchain, some of those assets, some of that IP is still associated with Block.one, and the community is not in control of them. So there's talk in this article that Danny Nelson capably reported this morning of a rebrand for this entire thing and a fork that Dan Larimer, who is a repeat entrepreneur in the blockchain space and someone who is held in high regard by the EOS community. He is back in the fold after disappearing from the scene for a bit. And this is kind of interesting to see how this is all shaking out. This has been kind of a quiet civil war brewing in EOS land for some time. And it's always fun to note on those things. So I'm going to throw it straight to Will because he's chuckling and his hair does still look amazing. Will, what are your thoughts on this EOS story?
It's helpless. It won't help me out. No, takeaways. First of all, don't call it a comeback. Dan Larimer has always been the man, and he will continue to be the man. This EOS thing has been dragging out for years. They basically became like this Bitcoin ETF that you could buy using a token of some sort, just because they had so much Bitcoin in the bank and they weren't developing anything. No one cared about the EOS token. Didn't matter at all. And then somehow the SPAC idea got involved where Block.one, which was developing the software project for EOS, decided to go public in a merger and become an exchange called Bullish. And now we see Dan Larimer is coming back. He's like the white knight riding to the EOS community, going to fix everything that has gone array over the last few years and bring EOS back into the conversation. This is the token, mind you, that was centerfold in Times Square with a huge banner billboard, much like we see Solana or Avalanche nowadays. It's time for a comeback. It's time for their Messiah to come back into the situation. And I'm pretty excited to see what this man can unveil. You throw it to Jen, though, for your take.
I just have a question for you. Can he breathe life back into this project, do you think? Like, do you think maybe too many things have gone wrong?
I don't know if mortals like Zach and I can really predict what Dan Larimer is going to do in this situation, but I do have high hopes that he can bring this project back from the brink. I still don't know what EOS is really going to do. Like, it doesn't quite make sense. Like, its purpose was to have some sort of different consensus mechanism than Bitcoin or Ethereum, where there was proof of stake, but not proof of stake. It had some delegation aspects to it. It's supposed to be very eco-friendly. You're supposed to be able to program it a little bit more, kind of like Ethereum. That never came about. Everyone who was early in it got a ton of money and then didn't really have incentives to build anything. And then we saw Block.one kind of came around. That project started building things like Voice, which never really launched and went mainstream. It's supposed to be some sort of social media application built on top of the EOS platform. Doesn't really exist to my knowledge. And then earlier this year, they also tried to get into the NFT game. Don't really know if that panned out. So yes, I have a lot of questions, but it's also Dan the Man, so who knows? I'm going to throw it up to Naomi.
It's interesting. I mean, Voice did launch. I don't think it was ever public. I think it was kind of beta and invites, but I think that everyone was accepted who actually requested an invitation. It's like blogging on there. I think the main issue was, honestly, the SEC. The SEC went after EOS in the early days, and after that moment, you just try getting an interview or getting any words from anyone who's part of Block.one. They were so tight-lipped. I tried for years to get any sort of comment from the people in charge of Block.one. So whether it was Dan or whether it's Brendan Bloomer, and they wouldn't talk to anyone because they were so afraid that their company would get more than just a slap on the wrist, which is what they got when the SEC, like they were one of the first companies that the SEC went after who had an ICO, and they ended up saying like, okay, well, here's a slap on the wrist and we'll settle. And I think that they were terrified of them just going after them, and they wouldn't say anything publicly, and they didn't want to be seen as being in control of the EOS network, which meant that they couldn't really spearhead projects and get things mobilized. And so everything just kind of disintegrated. So you end up with this foundation that has a ton of money and all these resources, and they raised it to really pour it into this ecosystem, and they ended up just sitting back and trying to not get attention. And that's just not the way to mobilize a network. We need to be coming out in front of the regulators. We need to be getting this stuff going. It's absolutely harder for regulators to shut this stuff down if it's already in the works. We can see that in a lot of decentralized apps out there. You see it in Ethereum. It's difficult for the government to go after them, even if they were to try to go after the Ethereum Foundation right now. That's great. Ethereum is this whole other beast controlled by all of these other people by this stage. EOS never really got there because in the early days they were just kind of thwarted. So I think that's a big lesson of how much government can get in the way of a new idea thriving. I agree with Will. I think Dan is a really interesting guy. He's this serial entrepreneur who's part of BitShares, he's part of Steemit. He then went on to EOS. A lot of people give him flack because they're like, oh, you just do one project, go on to the next. It's like, right, he does one successful project and then iterates on it as what he's learned, makes a better project, goes on to the next, makes it even... if you actually use these platforms, you could see this iterative process and how it's developed and how his ideas have developed. So I'm very interested to see what Dan comes up with next, whether it's with this Mandel upgrade, whether it's the other decentralized social media that he was hinting at working on. I think that he's a very interesting guy.